Welcome to Ask Tom Office Hours. What we're going to do today is talk about or take a couple of questions that have come in and also take a look at Oracle Open World 2019 highlights and more, depending on what you bring to the session. As I said, I have Chris Saxon with me here today. He's got a great YouTube channel for Magic of SQL. Follow him on Twitter in both of his accounts. He does a daily SQL tip, which is fantastic. Follow me on Twitter, so on and so forth. Now, in terms of the session today, as generally, we'll be talking, we'll be showing, we'll be dancing, you'll be watching. We have you all muted currently. You can use the chat. Just click on the chat window and type in your questions. It's also fine if you want to unmute and actually talk. We like to have more voices in the game, and we'll keep an eye on that chat sequence and go. So I had one question on the chat actually is, can you give me a permission to record the session? Sure, you can record the session. Again, we are recording the session. We will post it on the PL SQL Office Hours page, but if you'd like to have your own private recording so you can draw mustaches, well, I've already got one. He's already got one. So you can draw devilly horns on my head and so forth. Go for it. All right, so as I said, we're going to cover a couple of specific questions that have come up as opposed to a more general topic, which we've done recently. We're going to be talking about resetting package state, getting your row count. We'll talk about each of these in more detail. But first, what I'd like to do is invite Chris to give us some highlights from Oracle Open World 2019, which just completed.
Yep, so I just got back a week ago, a little bit more than a week ago. So it was it's another good open world. I think, I can't remember my third or fourth open world now, but it was quite a different feel, this one actually, from previous years. And those of you who haven't noticed, like looking at Stephen's slides, we've had a bit of a rebrand at Oracle. So there's less of the big Oracle red and more of the kind of muted, friendlier colors, which is reflecting a more of a customer-centric, customer-friendly approach. So someone's been listening to you, Stephen, about how we need to reach out to customers more and be more
softer
friendly.
colors. That was my top item.
Yeah, exactly.
Softer colors.
Softer colors. So those of you who've either been to Open World before or seen pictures will know that there's usually huge, big Oracle red banners throughout San Francisco. There were still banners, but none of them were big and red. So it felt quite different. And this is the start of a new change to make us more customer-centric, as I say. We'll see more of these changes in the future as time goes on. But I think the big announcement, which is hopefully one you've all already heard about, is the free Oracle Autonomous Database, or free Oracle Database. So this is one of the big announcements here, that we are now going to have always free services. So this isn't like previous trial accounts or trial accounts you might have tried elsewhere, where you've got a certain number of credits for a time-limited period, and then once you've used your credits or time's up, that's it, you've got to go paid. These are always free services, which you'll be able to have every single time. Now, it doesn't include everything. When you first sign up, as you see here, it says always free plus 30-day free trial. There are some services which are not included in the always free tier. So your 30-day free trial includes credits to use those and then decide whether or not you want to go to keep using those as a paid service. So what is in the always free tier? If you can bring up the next slide, Stephen. And so one of the key things is you get 2 autonomous databases, and these are databases you can use for absolutely anything you want. They could be your own, test and research instances just to play around. They could be development instances for your company, or they could be full-fledged production instances for something you're doing. Do note that, with being free, obviously, they are going to be quite limited. So there is a limit of 1 Oracle CPU. So you've just got, 1 core, essentially, or whatever we mean OCPU actually means these days. So you're limited to 1 of those for each database, and each can only have 20 gigs of storage. But they are full autonomous databases, including all the lovely stuff that's in them. And of course, if you're going to use these, you probably want to build some kind of application or something like that. So we've got free compute, which is 2 VMs. We've also got a whole bunch of other storage, so object and block storage, so you can store other kinds of flat files and things like that outside of your database. and a load balancer, so you've got way to manage your network and activity through your databases. So there's quite a bit in here, and of course it includes our lovely free tools such as Apex, SQL Developer Web. There's the SQL notebooks, which are already part of Autonomous Database, which you can use for machine learning and things like that. So as I said, always free, or for you to do whatever you want with. I've got mine up and running. I know Stephen has. A lot of people signed up over Open World as well. So please, we want you to go out and check those out and see what's happening. Any questions or comments on those?
Yeah, so I did publish a post last week that I'm going to be using my free cloud account to build an app to track different locations of invasive species. I'm really big on fighting invasives in my area. And there's a lot, amazing amounts you can do. And I encourage you to check out the possibilities, and feel free to contact me if you're interested in doing something similar. You never have to go to the gym again. You can just work out outside. It's wonderful. But anyway, so I'm going to build an app that will help me keep track of locations. And I've already got actually 3 volunteers helping me. But I think it'd be great for all of you to explore what you can do with the free cloud database. In fact, if you could, in your participant window, you can click on yes or no and other things. But if you could click on yes if you've already gotten your free cloud account, that would be great. Let's see what we've got going there.
We've got at least one person, Pete K.
Excellent. 1 yes, 1 no, 1 lots of we're wondering.
Yeah, thinking about it.
Sure.
Oh,
we got a question from Dennis. Are we going to receive new releases of Oracle XE when there is a free tier of the cloud database in the future? Great question. So the answer is yes, there will still be XE releases for sure. I think that right now we're not seeing a 19C XE release come out, but you should see one next year. So you're not necessarily going to see a yearly XE release, though that may eventually come. But you're definitely going to see them at a much greater frequency than you've seen in the past. The big jump 11G to 18C, you're not going to see anything like that again. But the free tier, the free database, is not a replacement for Oracle XE. You'll still be able to download it, get it off. You can run your own local database as well as running it in the cloud. All right, so it looks like some folks are trying it out. We do encourage you to do that. And one thought I have is, we've benefited so much from Oracle technology over the years. I mean, it's given me a great life, especially PL SQL. And I think a lot of you can say the same. And we're always looking for ways to give back. So one of the things you might want to do is look around in your community. Are there NGOs, nonprofits, small nonprofits that might be able to benefit from an app, whether it's something that they could have online for other people to visit, or whether it's just something for their internal practices. Apex allows you to build these kinds of internal business management, process management apps super quickly and easily. So you could actually, in your own community, be helping out nonprofits by leveraging the always free Oracle Cloud. Of course, they should get their own account. Comment from Dennis. Gerald Wenzel promised a yearly XE release as well as a full version of on-premises database. Well, I wonder if he did promise. Listen, I'm not contradicting you, but if you can find the promise, I'd like to see it, because of course, we at Oracle are certainly trained to be very careful about making promises that we can't necessarily support or back up. Like, that's why we're always very cautious about talking about future features in releases of the database. But if he did promise that, I'm sorry, it looks like right now there won't be one this year. But like I say, there's no question they will be more frequent than they had been for a long time. And you'll be getting just more and more options of access to free Oracle databases. And Judith, some comments on the colors, but I won't go into reading all of that. You can read it on your own. So we'll stay focused on the technology side of things. And listen, in case you're wondering, the rebranding, the imagery, the new colors, the what someone might have said is a strange imagery. It's part of a broader effort within Oracle to rethink how we need to present ourselves and how we need to work with our customers. And you will be seeing many more programs coming out from Oracle over the next year and beyond that I think will show you a clear shift in Oracle on how it's planning on supporting its customers and moving into the 21st century in a big way on the cloud and off the cloud. And for sure, and what's most exciting for me, the database is front and center of that whole initiative. The autonomous database is the driver for everything that's going on inside Oracle right now. The fact that we're giving away these free databases is fantastic. The fact that Application Express is now being talked about at the highest levels of management and keynotes within Oracle is new, and I think is finally giving a light and cover to the most successful application development tool we've had in a very long time, and something that I think will help tremendously our user base across the world and their users. So I think it's a very exciting time to be working within the Oracle database arena. Once again, it's always been fun for me. And we've got a question here: is Oracle going to contribute more to open source these days as Microsoft does? I would say yes, we will be contributing more and more to open source. Whether we do it in the same way or as much as Microsoft, I can't speak to that. But certainly we've been very involved around the Grail VM, and I know around Oracle Functions, a variety of different initiatives. So I think that we're moving in the right direction, and we'll see how that unfolds.
Yeah, interesting comment from Judith about the pros and cons of on-premises databases versus XE versus the always free cloud. I think when it comes to, I think we could cover quickly like the free options of XE versus autonomous. I think for me, the advantage of using something like autonomous is it's up to us as in Oracle to look after the whole thing. All the patching, all the management, all that is just going to get handled. So you don't need to worry about that. Whereas XE, you still got to install it. When we do come up with new releases, actually come along and patch it and upgrade it to the next version and so on. So from that perspective, it's just easier to get going. That said, autonomous is cloud, and there can be networking connectivity issues in various places for good and bad reasons. So having your own local instance of XE means you can just get up and running and do whatever it is you want to do without having to worry about, am I able to connect to this network, or am I on some remote location, or am I on a plane where I can't get any Wi-Fi at all? I think XE is great if you want to have full control and start playing around. If you want to look at things like more DBA type functions, then you need to use XE because you can't do that with autonomous. But for general development, I think autonomous is just far easier. It's just kind of click, set it up, and you don't really have to worry about it after that. That's my perspective on this.
Excellent, thanks, Chris. Any other? So we'll see if any other questions or comments come in around free database and the free cloud. Any other reflections on Open World 2019?
I don't think. I think it's it was a good, solid event, and I think overall people seemed positive. I mean, lots of people loving the free new database. Seemed broadly positive on the new look, although as I think some of the people on the call here are kind of, well, we'll see what this really means and translates into how we behave in the future. But as Stephen says, hopefully we'll have some good stuff coming in the coming year to actually address those concerns.
All right, thanks. Then let's move on to the topics at hand, which means I'll turn my camera back on. All right, so we had a couple of questions come in advance of the session, and I thought we'd not only answer them when they came in, but also share them with all of you. And so the first one is, reset my package state, please. So here's the question that came in. When an exception gets raised in a package, procedure, or function, even when that exception is handled, let's say with a rollback, the package variables are not reset. So is there any way to do that? Essentially, something went wrong. I assume when they were initializing the package or when they were running the package, they want to reset the state back to initialized. So the question is, how do you do that? Now, first of all, in terms of resetting package state, let's talk about the concept of package state. A package has state when there are package level variables, constants, cursors, things like that. In other words, not just procedures and functions, but things that can have a state, a value. So I can assign a value to a variable. That package then contains the variable. It has a certain state at that point in your session. And each session has its own potentially different state of affairs. The variables can have different values. The cursor could be open versus closed. Oracle does provide a packaged program called DBMS session reset package. That sounds perfect, right? Pass the name of your package, it resets the package, and you're good, except that reset package resets the status of all the packages that are initialized in your session. So obviously it should be reset all packages, and it'd be nice if maybe reset package just did one package, but We didn't get to decide these things. We get to use what's offered. So that's what you have available. And sometimes, in fact, that will be done by Oracle automatically. It will tell you that it reset package state. I believe when you get the -4068 error. So in other words, when you've tried to execute something in a package that is in a different state somewhere else, or has been recompiled, then it automatically reinitializes all the packages in your state. So if you want to reset one package, you have to write some code, not that. So I'll fix that typo at some point, but I won't do it right now. So basically what you have to, go ahead.
So we had a question come in. If multiple people are accessing the same package, is there state for each user, or is it global state?
Chris, why don't you answer that? Since
well, it's each session has its own package state. So if I've got 2 sessions, each of them will have their own state depending on what else I've done in a session. Because quite often in web environments, you've got a connection pool, so multiple users could share the same package, which is also one reason why you might need to reset state.
Mm-hmm.
People come in, do what they're going to do, and then you need to clear their state out before actually the next person can pick up that session. So yes, it is particular to a session.
And in general, I think we talked about this on the last call. Since you're now often using connection pooling, you might be with each call coming in from the internet, from your web app, you might be connecting to a different session. And so in general, the idea of package state is something you need to be very wary of in terms of relying on that in your application. We also had a question from Kevin. How do we implement global state for the same package? You mean a state of values across multiple sessions? Well, you wouldn't do that in a package. So a package is a bunch of code and a bunch of variables or stateful stuff if it has them, and those are always going to be per session. If you want things that cross sessions, then you're talking about essentially SGA-based memory. And there you could be looking at things like function result caches as mechanisms for implementing cross-session caching of values. And also, as Dennis suggested, you could take a look at DBMS pipe. So DBMS pipe is a package that's been around, for such a long time. And it allows you to basically pass data between different sessions. And it's been used in a whole variety of ways over the years. I don't know how much people are using it these days because there are more specialized packages to implement features that people used to use DBMS pipe for, like queuing. But you certainly could. The tricky thing to remember there, if it is an issue for you, is if the database goes down, your pipe state is lost. So that's all essentially just sitting there in memory and it's gone. So you could look at doing something like that. If you need to implement global state for your application, you should think very carefully about what the requirements are and look for something that's made to do what you want. And if you're starting to hack together some sort of interesting utility with DBMS pipe, I'm not saying you'd be wrong, but chances are you'd be digging yourself a pretty big hole that will be hard to dig yourself out of.
Yeah, just also kind of following up on that. Usually, I mean, we have the core thing of to manage state across sessions in databases with the table. You can always just store the data somewhere. And as Yuda says as well, you could use application contexts if you need something a bit more lightweight than a full table. But if you need, as Stephen said, there's lots of issues that can happen if you've got something in memory. So tables is probably the first place you should be looking, and then only looking at other solutions if that doesn't give the performance needs that you want, basically.
Great. And we've got Eric Olson. Variables defined as constants no longer give a package state. You mean no longer set package state? I'm not sure that's true. I think that would be true for static expressions that are assigned to constants. So if you assign a literal like 10, I believe that no longer is counted as package state. But if you're calling a function to assign the value to the constant, that's certainly going to be a package state setting. So I believe that's how that would work. Maybe it could be a nice idea to define a package as global and then make its state shareable across session, a little similar to the result cache. Maybe that would be a good idea. Yeah. And a DBMS pipe is useful for real-time output from PL SQL. So you're running an application, you want to see what's going on in the app. If you send output to DBMS output, you can't see it until your session or your block is completed executing. So Jared is suggesting, well, you could use DBMS pipe to pipe it out. Another session can read the information out of the pipe. absolutely, Jared. That is one of the typical kind of things that people used to do. These days, I think you'd simply use an autonomous transaction procedure. And so you would write it out to a table, commit it without changing the status of your session transaction. And then you could look at the contents of the table. But again, it could be completely valid to go either way. Great ideas. All right, so let's go over to Live SQL just to show you the basic idea here. This is not rocket science. We've been talking about concepts far more complicated than what I'm going to show you, but just in case you're not a rocket scientist in the world of Oracle database. So again, go to livesql.oracle.com, just search for reset package. So I'm going to search for reset package.
Oh, we've still got your slide up rather than...
Oh, right, I'm not sharing my desktop because I was told that when I share my desktop, some people were experiencing like 90% consumption of their computer resources.
Really?
Yeah, and then if I shared just Windows, then it wasn't so bad. So I'm trying that out. Thank you for the reminder. Okay, I'm at Live. Now you can see Live SQL?
Yep, it's up.
All right. This time I'll spell it right too. So reset package state, just one. So here's an example of a package that could be stateful. I've got a variable at the package level, and I've got a procedure to set the value. I also initialize it in my initialization section. So I set my default value. I can see my default value, which is set simply by actually referencing. As soon as I reference the package right here, that causes this code to run and displays 100. Then I'm going to change the value to 1,000. You can see the value set to 1,000. If I try to reset package, well, you can try it yourself. You can't do it inside Live SQL because it's restricted in terms of DBMS session access. But try it yourself. One thing to realize about DBMS reset package, and you'll see it very easily, is that, again, it resets all packages, and that means also DBMS output is disabled. And this is something that even when I was running this script on my autonomous database, and I'm looking at, there's no output. Where's the output? Why aren't I seeing output for all of these? And then I remembered, yes, DBMS output. So not just your packages, all packages, reinitialized. So I re-enabled DBMS output, which you wouldn't need even in Live SQL. Then I take a look at my session value again. Now this will cause the package to be reinitialized, and my default is 1,000. Wait a minute. I think we should run this. Because that didn't look right, did it?
Oh, did it still?
Let's see. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Okay, I guess I should have looked at my output earlier and more closely. So it looks to me like, oh, I'm sorry. DBMS session reset package didn't happen. It didn't reset the package state. So it's still 1,000. It's not the default. So that's what's going on there. If you run this in your own instance, then you'll see it show up as 100. And so then what I do is if I want to force it to reset, then I have my initialization package. I basically create a procedure to initialize my package. And this can have whatever I want in it. It could be simply the logic that was in here, or it could be that I never even run the initialization automatically, but just have it available to reinitialize as needed. And then I can reset my values. And then it's reset back. So, no rocket science. Again, when you're working within Live SQL, be aware that there are some limitations, but you can just load up your always free Oracle Cloud instance, which I should have done right here to show it to you. And let's see, a couple of comments. Couldn't it be possible to implement reset at an individual package level? I assume that's a question. I think what Judith is asking, couldn't it be possible for the PL SQL team to implement a reset at an individual package level? I would assume the answer is yes, since they're magicians when it comes to all things PL SQL. But my guess would be that if I talked to the team about it, they would say, we could do it, but it's really tricky. Probably having to do with dependencies between packages and package states of different packages. I expect that the reason they implemented reset package as reset package state for the entire session is that they could not find a way to safely isolate resets. Just a guess. And Joseph correctly points out that my reset package failed. So that was a good one. And yes, I know, Judith, that you have complained about DBMS session not be available, and we continue to work on honing what is available in DBMS session, and that may change over time. Right now, there are, unfortunately, still those limitations. Okay, so other questions on reset package or comments on it? Otherwise, I'll switch back to good old PowerPoint.
I don't see any others back in the chat. I don't see any we've missed, so.
Okay. Oh, and also just going back to pipe versus autonomous transactions, Jared says, I use autonomous transactions for logging and debugging. Pipe is better for monitoring a stream of debug data. So I agree. You've got this constant stream of stuff coming out at high speed out of your application, and you just want to sort of watch it in real time, not have to go back and query the table over and over again. Sure, definitely. And by the way, Jared, if you've got a utility like that you've built that you like, that you can share with others, you might think about doing so. It won't run, I'm pretty sure, on Live SQL, but you can still post it as a script here and share it. Okay. Moving right along. So the next question that came in was kind of interesting. Get my row count before fetching. So this person had a situation where they were getting data out of a table or a set of tables and then writing it out to a file, and they were taking multiple columns and combining them onto a single line, as you see, data 1, data 2, data 3. And a new requirement had come out that they needed to, at the top of the file, indicate the number of lines in the file. Now, so 5 and then the 5 lines. Now you might say things like, well, but can't you find out how many lines there are in the file by, without having to hard code it at the top of the file? Maybe so, but anyway, requirements are requirements. So the question was, how do I go about doing this? In other words, I want to get my row count before I fetch the data. So we started taking a look at different ways that this could be done. And several that we came up with, and we'd love to hear about your own ideas. I'm sure that we've missed some, is that first of all, execute the query twice. So execute it once with a select count star over the whole thing and get the count, and then go through your algorithm, write out the amount and then go through your algorithm. Bulk collect into an array and use the count method. Use the count over analytic function, rely on approximate count, and then let's find out what other things you have. So we've also got a live SQL script called get count first that you can take a look at, but we'll stay in the slides for a moment first. And sorry, I just went through, I thought somebody else came up, right. An interesting case, maybe this is for DBMS pipe, would be to make a package react transparently by reinitializing itself when encountering a 4067. So interesting idea, Judith. I will take that up after the session's over and see about passing some of it along to the team. And Eric suggests a couple of other things. Mm-hmm. Fetch data in a CTE, then 2 selects joined by union all. Cool. Mm-hmm. And Judith, Tom Kite used to say about this issue that there's no real need to see in advance the total count of rows. Yeah, I agree about that, right. But when people say, how do we do this, as Chris well in Ask Tom world, you try to figure out how to do it. Okay, so execute the query twice. So I've taken my cursor, basically whatever was in the CData cursor, and I said, well, I'm just going to do that same query and get the count first, write the amount out, and then iterate through the data set and write out the line. So why wouldn't you do this? Chris, why not do this?
Well, first up, you're running the query twice, which essentially doubling the work you're going to do. But also there's a chance that these could return different results, which is the main thing to watch for.
That's a very good point. Yep.
Yeah. So statement level consistency means that you get the all committed rows at the time your query starts. Now, there are ways you can get around that. You could do things like flashback query or change your isolation level, but then you're still running the query twice. So I'm not really a fan of this approach. But it's there if you need it.
Great. Okay, so you can do it, but besides the performance issue, be aware that when you've got 2 different queries, even if they're separated only by a very small slice of time, it's possible that in between those 2 queries, something's changed in your data set and they're different. It's very unlikely in most cases, but it certainly could be the case. Okay, second, my initial reaction to this person was, well, instead of having a cursor for loop that iterates through the data set and writes out the result, why don't you fetch bulk collect into an array with the same cursor And then you've got the count from the array, and then you can iterate through the array and write them out to the file. This way you don't have two different queries. You've got a bulk collect. Of course, the cursor for loop is also doing a similar thing to bulk collect, but only fetching 100 rows at a time. So in theory, this could even be a little bit faster. What do you think?
I think it's better. We're only doing the query once. And if we know this is only going to return like a small number of rows, a few hundred, maybe a couple of thousand, I think this actually is quite good. But of course, then we're loading all that data into memory, aren't we? So if this file could return millions of rows, that doesn't look too promising, does it?
So that's the killer. Whenever you're thinking about using bulk collect or arrays in general, remember that the arrays take up process global area memory, PGA memory, per session memory. So this, I think, will be an excellent solution when you've got a relatively small data set, or it's like running as a single job where you can allocate a lot of memory to it. So in general, this kind of code has a hidden assumption and time bomb in it, which is that as your data set grows over time, and they usually do grow, not shrink, at some point you could start getting errors from code that hasn't been touched for 20 years, driving everybody totally crazy. So nice solution, performance-wise, great, but it has an important assumption around the quantity of data that you're fetching. And we've got another comment here from Kevin, or after the file is created, can you create an external table for the file and do the count? So
yeah, I mean, if you create an external table to unload data, that has to be a data pump format file. You can't use it for a text file. I'm assuming that's what you're trying to say there, Kevin. But
so you use util-file to create the file. You couldn't read that file using an external table?
You can read it, but then how do you put the total back into it?
Well, that to me, and that's the kicker. So let's say you write it out to the file, you don't write the number of rows, then you get the number of rows with an external table query. The problem is that there's no mechanism in util-file to say insert this line at the top.
Yeah.
So there's no random write capabilities with util-file. You open the file and you either append to it or you just start overwriting the lines. So it's a nice idea, and it's always good to keep in mind external table usages. But I think in this case it wouldn't work.
So he does have a comment further up, and it's like, do we even need to do this in the database? Can we use OS tools to, write two or combine two files?
Yeah.
And if you're able to actually write the process to do that, you may be in a situation where you just are not able to access any kind of file system commands or anything.
Right.
A lot of environments tend to lock that down quite strictly in terms of who can do something on the OS itself. But if you can, I think that's a good way around this.
And I guess it's a good reminder that when you're facing requirements like this, right? So the boss comes along and says, hey, we need to get the number of rows that you're going to write out to the file and put it at the top of the file. It's probably a good point to stop and say, well, what are the tools available to me? What are the possible options, not just staying locked into the concept of how do I do it in PL SQL and SQL? And there may be other opportunities that come available to you. All right, now we did have some thought from Judith about using a count over as an additional column of the query. Chris, what do you think of that idea?
I actually quite like this. I mean, provided you're going to get all the data, I think this can be quite a good approach, because then you don't have the two queries. It's always going to be read consistent, so you don't have to worry about mismatch counts and so on. So as long as you're going to get all the data and you're going to process the entire result set, then I actually like this a lot. The downside or the drawback is if you're using this to do some kind of pagination. So you want to say, here's my query, we're going to get 10,000 rows, but we're only going to show the first 10. Then you've got the hit of counting everything, but only return a small subset. But as long as you are processing the whole data, I like this approach a lot, actually.
And it will not run that count over and over again.
Yes, correct.
Wow, that's smart. Excellent. Okay, so that's a slick way to use an analytic function. And we have, by the way, a comment from Dennis. I think Kevin meant that you can create an external table on top of the created file, then run select count star from external table. But for this, I would use internal external table feature of 19C or 18C. I'm not sure about that.
Hmm.
So while Chris ponders, perhaps I'll keep going. So one other possible solution here is use the approximation aggregate functions. So you've got count, and if you select count star across the entire table, however fast or not fast it is, you're doing a second query. And if there's a way to cut down on the cost of that, it'd be great. And so Oracle now offers, I think it was introduced in 12c, is that right?
It's 12.2, yeah.
12.2. So why don't you take it away and talk about this?
Oh no, actually maybe it was 12.1 this one, sorry. But yeah, approx count distinct. So count distincts are something that are quite expensive. So things like show me how many different customers placed orders in the past week rather than just the total number of orders. It's fairly common, particularly in analytic heavy workloads, but if you've got a lot of count distincts, they can be really expensive. So we introduced this approx count distinct, which uses a lovely algorithm called hyperloglog. So if you ever want to look up the details of how this works, you can read up on how hyperloglog works. But yeah, it's a count distinct approximation, which is something like typically over 95% accurate. So provided the fields you're actually going to be in your file are distinct, you can pass them all in, as Stephen shows there, and get the approx count. Remembering, of course, it is an approximation. So, with pros and cons, improved performance probably, but could be wrong, or very likely to be wrong, actually, certainly on large data sets.
And it's probably not a good fit for this one, but I thought I'd include it because it's worth reminding us that we have this capability now. And you'll see in Live SQL that you can also, there's a script for this one too. You can see that you can actually tell the database to basically, you don't have to go and change your calls to count distinct. It'll automatically, under the covers, use approximate count distinct in place of count distinct with the right setting. Again, you'd really want to be careful about doing that. It would only be in cases where it doesn't matter if it's off a little bit. So Stephen, how many Twitter impressions did you get today? Well, 118K, good enough. And it doesn't matter if it's off by 1 or 2 or 100. But in this situation, it probably would not make sense. And of course, there wasn't a distinct as a part of it. But thought we'd use it as an opportunity to make sure you know about it. Okay, so that covers the 2 topics that we had in advance. And let's see if there are other questions or comments that any of you have. And I'm also, while that's happening, going to take a look at another question that had come in. So comments or questions from the crowd.
Oh, got something from Dennis, 1 of 3, okay. The project he's currently working on, there are a lot of procedures which return a CIFS ref cursor as an out parameter of the result of their work. Then on the consumer side, people fetch data from these cursors, okay? I don't really like this approach because I'm more on the pipeline table function side. I already came up with a number of advantages of PTFs to the ref cursors on the project, but I'm not sure about the performance difference between these two. Is there any difference in performance, speed, memory needed between these 2 approaches to implement getters, considering similar implementation of the functions inside the course? Let's imagine my getX pipeline table function returns a data type of 100 fields. Is there a difference in the amount of generated network traffic between database and consumer between such calls as select star from table package, table getX versus select AB from table get package getX? Oh, I think maybe I'm missing a subtlety in what you're saying about what the difference is between those, Dennis.
I think it's AB versus star.
So yeah, I mean, then it's just the amount of columns. The fewer columns you select, the less data you're sending, and all other things being equal, the faster it's going to be, or certainly the less network traffic there's going to be because you're sending less over.
Is that right, Dennis? Is that what you're asking in terms of the distinction? Just the star versus A comma B? And this may be something we want to take up at a next office hours or offline at some point.
It sounds like a bit more of a detailed
He cheated.
question.
He was sitting there typing up a 3-part question while we were talking.
Yes. Sneaking it in. Go on. Yes, 3rd question is about this. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the thing. Hang on, but you had a second question. So is there a difference in performance between these 2 approaches? So using fetching from a ref cursor versus a pipeline table function, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
offhand, I wouldn't be able to tell you definitively about performance differences, but I would think that sysref cursors passing information back out would be pretty darn efficient.
Yeah.
Without having to go through the PTF, but it's the sort of thing that in the abstract would be hard to say.
Yeah. I think the big difference is your table function, you can put in another SQL statement. So depending on what you're doing on the other side, if you're joining it to other data, for example, a table function's the right way to go. Whereas a sysref cursor and fetching out of it, yeah, that's going to be tricky. But if you're just talking about just streaming the data across, yeah, I don't have a specific.
Yeah, if you're just fetching rows, I'm not sure how putting a pipeline table function, and then the other question, of course, would be whether or not you can take advantage of the pipelining, that you can consume the rows in advance of the full set being retrieved. Certainly, if that's the case, then pipeline table functions have an awful lot to offer. Other than that, I would think the sysref cursor is just going to be better overall. Just my quick guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say on that without looking at it further.
Okay. And let's.
We had a point from Niall. Isn't the point of database setting for a prox count distinct that you have to be clear what every query that is issued against the database requires in terms of accuracy, i.e. Stephen's accuracy is lax, Chris requires accurate data.
Yeah, so I would agree. I would think that the chance of you wanting to set at a database level that you only want to use approximates for your count distincts seems like it's got to be a pretty low likelihood of success, or that you'd want to do it. So yes, it's available. I am not sure how many, if any, of our users use it, but there it is. It's something you can do. So I agree with you completely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just said, go ahead.
So I know there's some customers who do a lot of very heavy analytic processing. Think people who are analyzing customer behavior, doing things like counting how many people bought product X, or have different demographic things, who's the distinct customers in this bracket, distinct customers in that bracket. There are definitely people who do that on very large data sets, which is, and again, they use this not to kind of get the definitive answer. It's more like, well, last week on our website, how many different customers did we have? Is it more or less than 1 million type of thing? And then go, okay, it was 500,000, so we need to do X. Oh, it was 2 million, so that means we need to do Y. That kind of analysis.
So as with many of these newer features in the database, the use case is critical, and you need to very carefully qualify it. There's ongoing conversation around sysref cursors versus pipeline. Judith pointing out that with a pipeline function, you're producing rows to return, whereas with a ref cursor, you're simply executing a query, which is potentially true, but of course you could have a pipeline table function, which is just has a query in it that's returning the rows. So they can work well together, but there are a bit of a difference. And I think Dennis is now preparing his 4th and 5th major paragraphs. Here's a question from Siva. Is there any way to get dynamic numbers of columns at runtime from a select statement? Something like dynamic columns as output from pivot clauses, not using the pivot XML. Is it possible to achieve this using a polymorphic table function, Chris?
Yes. So this is really one of the key things polymorphic table functions do, is they allow you to define at runtime which columns you want to appear in your result set. So you could do things like select star except these columns. So they are the way you can do this. We've got, I think, are you pulling up the things?
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's a session from August in which October 11th and August of 2018, Chris focused on polymorphic table functions in his sessions, in his office hour sessions. So do check them out and explore the feature more generally. But yeah, lots of power there. Okay. And Judith, I think when you say PTF, are you now referring to polymorphic table functions? Or I think so. You have a hammer, everything is a nail. Yes, it's certainly, there's a potential there. So listen, folks, before the hour is up, we did have a question that came in just before the session started. And I wanted to show it to you because it's got to do with regular expressions of which I am completely ignorant. Chris is a lot better than me at it, and he was even coming up with we're struggling with some of it, so I thought I'd also show it to all of you in case you have an answer. So they sent in this query in which they want to be able to substitute, it looks like a form of masking, each of the abbreviations of the months with, let's say, month substitute. And they want to only search for those part words, not things like the janitor, that should not be replaced. And they were struggling to come up with a regular expression that would work, partly because I guess our regular expression replace function doesn't support the /b, look ahead, look behinds. So I don't know if any of you are really sharp in regular expressions and can make sense of this in the time that we have here. Chris, if you wanted to, did you want to talk about what you did?
Yeah, so, well, if you just go back up to the regular expression itself, I
Sure.
know why what they're doing doesn't give the answer they want. So basically, it swaps out January and March, but not February and April. And the reason for that is it's because it's looking for something before and after each of those abbreviations. So it says, get me a start of the string or W, so character, before January and something after it. So it matches start of line January, comma, and replaces that with month subs with the spaces. You then go to the next character, which is F. So when you're looking at F, you're saying, I need something before Feb and something after it. And of course, we've already passed that first comma, which is why it doesn't get replaced, and April at the end doesn't get replaced as well. Now, in terms of how you do that fix that with regular expressions, I don't know exactly. So my idea or thought was you do a CSV to rows on this. So assuming that pretty much they're all just single word values, basically. You can split that out, convert them into rows, and then each row is either just going to be, Jan, Feb, March, April, janitor. They're going to be the 5 rows you'll get as the output, and then it's much easier to write any kind of replace or regular expression to do it. I'm sure it's possible within a single regular expression, but that's starting to blow my mind a bit. So.
And our chat stream has gone completely silent on the topic. I guess we have no regular expression aficionados out there today. Too bad. Okay, well, I'll send back what Chris has suggested as some sort of response, and maybe that'll help them out. And in the meantime, and as we shut down, we do have yes, Dennis has come up with his multiple paragraphs. Now Jared says, if I understand correctly the problem, just add the global flag.
Okay.
And do you know what that means? What does it mean to add the global flag, Jared?
So that's searching for it anywhere within the string rather than continuing from the end of the last match, I think. Or matches.
All matches
yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. And we might close with this. So the main concern in Dennis's use case with ref cursors is as follows. The function which returns the sysref cursor as a result takes return columns in parameter, a commented separated list of values, which then is concatenated to the query, a dynamic SQL query, making it vulnerable to SQL injection. And they needed this only because they wanted to specify which columns they need to each run. A query to a pipeline table function can select only the needed columns by definition without going for dynamic SQL and sacrificing security.
Okay.
By definition. So do you mean polymorphic table function and not pipeline table function? I mean, because if they want to be able to specify which columns, how are you doing that at runtime even in a pipeline table function?
Because they know which columns they want. So they select ABC from the table function, whereas the ref cursor, you're getting whatever.
Oh, so the table function returns all the columns and then they filter it down. Okay, interesting. So that's a good point. I'd be surprised if there was much of a difference in performance, though I would still think that sysref cursor just has less overhead. Again, depends on whether or not you're able to be taking advantage of pipelining. In terms of the security issue of dynamic SQL, it shouldn't be that hard. You can certainly do a lot of checking of the string, not to say that you can get 100%, but it shouldn't be that hard to trap almost anything that they're going to be sending in if you're aware of the issue and you're checking. one of the big dangers around SQL injection is that you're allowing user input to be passed directly to the string and not paying attention, not realizing that's a dangerous area and checking the string. So it's definitely good to be aware of. And if that becomes the primary issue, then yeah, I think the switch to pipelining would make a lot of sense. Okay. Alrighty. Let's see, anything else?
So Niall has a point just on the regular expressions, and he says every time we have a complex regular expression, then subsequent readers can never understand it.
Yeah.
So and I think that's a great point. I think, was it yesterday, somebody was saying on Twitter, I love regular expressions because every time I look at them, I get to relearn how regular expressions work. It's like, yeah.
Or use Perl, says Niall.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is tough. Eric asks, how does lateral work in the slide that's not up anymore? So, Chris, I think we've got a request to actually explain what you wrote there, so I'll bring it back up.
Yeah. So lateral is something we added in 12C, and this is where you want to join two tables, but not in the join clause, if that kind of makes sense. Basically, we've got that vowels, we're selecting from vowels, and we want to pass a column from that into a subquery. And so lateral enables us to do that. So that means for each row, we had 2 rows out of in that vowels table. So I selected, what August, Sept, and so on as well as a separate row. Then they would come in as different data sources. So that means for each of those, the length would be slightly different. So it would generate the appropriate number of rows. If we don't do that, then you end up with this horrible explosion of rows. You've got a cross join essentially. So what it allows you to do basically is pass rows from the first table into the second, which is very handy in some situations.
Do you by any chance have any scripts in Live SQL that kind of show that processing? Because we're not equipped to do that with that specific example. Let's see.
Lateral. I'm sure there are some, but there's one in there. I'm not sure who that's from. I think it's
well, I won't go exploring these scripts since we don't know what's in them, but perhaps you might take a little to load up a script to demonstrate lateral, so it can make that point clearer. All right, we are at the top of the hour. Any other questions or comments?
I think a lot of people agreeing with the points about regular expressions.
Right.
It's just
the hammer in which everything is a nail syndrome. Yes. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. Hopefully that conversation around getting your counts, regular expressions, always free Oracle Cloud, and so on was interesting and useful to you. And again, do check out the Always Free Oracle Cloud account. Get your account, set it up. And I say that in part because as a member of the community, you probably have access to Oracle databases. It's probably not the most critical thing on your list. But certainly to get a handle on autonomous database, even if your company hasn't gone to it yet or isn't going to it anytime soon, will be, I think, important for you and your company. And also, when you use this program, you're sending a message to the management of our company saying, this was a good move. People are really excited about this. We will keep it going and maybe even expand the Always Free offerings. So that's a great reason by itself to get your account. And like I say, look to see in ways that you can take advantage of the Always Free services to help others around you. Thanks very much for joining us. Hope to see you next month. Thank you, Chris, for all your information and expertise today.
No problem. It's good to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Have a great October.
Yes, okay.
Take care.
Bye.